All right, class. We're here today. Thank you for coming. It's going to be an interesting day. Everybody pull out their homework. I'm going to come around and collect. Thank you very much. I'll grade these and get them back to you at the end of the class. All right, as you can see on the board is your vocabulary words and the plan for today. We're going to do a little bit of lecture to begin with. Then I've got a video. We'll do a discussion, a little bit more lecture, and then some group work. Before we begin the lecture, let me pass out guided notes for you to do this today. Here's what I need you guys to fill out during the lecture. Hopefully it will come into place. I also included your homework for the day. Let's do it tomorrow, as well as more information on the Industrial Revolution. As you know, today we are studying the Industrial Revolution. I think before we begin, we need to remember the essential question: what caused the Industrial Revolution in England in the 1800s? Well, in the mid-1700s, an industrial revolution began in England that transformed the way work was done. I know, it's crazy how that happens. Rather than making goods by hand, new processes were included. New machines mass-produced products which lowered costs, increased profits, and changed the way people did business and how they lived. Here we have England and the rest of Europe showing off just the spread. By 1900, industrialization spread through Europe to the United States, transforming the West into the dominant region of the world. I mean, as we studied before the rise of Industrial Revolution, the Far East, China, India, these were the big centers of trade. But with the rise of industrialization, as we'll soon find out, it changed. So again, we have to ask ourselves, what caused the Industrial Revolution, and why did it begin in England when it could have begun anywhere else? Well, before we can understand what and why the Industrial Revolution happened, we have to understand what life was like before the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, most Europeans worked and lived on small farming villages using inefficient methods of farming. I mean, they mostly farmed by hand. They didn't have a lot of tools. They didn't have a lot of machinery. I mean, they relied on medieval and inefficient three-field system. Few farmers experimented with new farm techniques. Hey guys, we got soon we'll have a vocabulary word coming up. As a result, the food that was produced kept the population of Europe from growing rapidly. There just wasn't enough food to go around. And I'm a large lad, and I like having lots of food, but I wouldn't be able to be this corpulent back then because, we just didn't have the option. But in the mid-1700s, new techniques, like we had farms, which helped to cause enclosures, which were basically large farms, which you might want to be writing down now because it's a vocabulary word. Good job. And then another one, scientific farming methods like crop rotation maximized farmland and increased production. They kind of realized that if you planted wheat in the same field every time, the nutrients would be run out because wheat requires the same nutrients every year. But if you rotate it with turnips, barley, they would require different nutrients. And by rotating what fields were planted in, that would help. New crops like corn and potatoes, which they got from America, were also introduced, and those became very popular. And new tools like the iron plow and seed drill made farming more efficient. Have any of you had a backyard garden before? It's terrible, but it's terrible doing it by yourself. Now imagine you had acres and acres of land, and you had to do that by yourself. For one, I'm glad that we've got these new methods to provide us with more sustenance and more food. As a result of this agricultural revolution, more food was made and Europe's population increased. I mean, if there's more food, you can support more people. It makes sense, trust me. But I write this down. It all works. This large population of workers who would soon find work in industrial factories. It's another thing that we're going to want to be talking about. The Industrial Revolution began in England for a variety of reasons. I mean, about 80% of the British lived in rural areas. Workers weaved textiles on hand. In 1750s, most British products were still made by hand. A few years later, most textiles were machine-made in factories. It's just faster to make it with a machine. England had large deposits of natural resources, especially iron and coal. England had banks, a government that encouraged trade and invention and money to invest in industry. And England's colonies, such as the Americas, India, Canada, the Caribbean, provided cheap raw materials and markets to sell their industrial goods. From 1750 to 1850, England was the most industrialized nation in the world. I mean, they had factories. 50% of the British people lived and worked in cities. And here you can see just how much mining, factories just there were. And I mean, look at all these cities that you can see. I mean, that's a large population increase in the 1850s. What was the first industry to industrialize? Actually, the population boom created a demand for clothing. But traditional methods of textile making were slow. I mean, I don't know if any of you guys have ever gone to a Renaissance fair where they sell a lot of that handmade stuff. It takes them hours and hours to make one garment. Imagine having to do that, work 8 hours and maybe make 1 or 2 garments. It's just not economically feasible. So machines helped the textile industry, and it became the first to become industrialized. Does anybody want to have a guess what these inventions do? That looks like a loom, I think. It spins yarn. I mean, here's a weaves yarn into cloth. Any guesses? You're right, it is a sewing machine. New inventions sped up spinning, weaving, and sewing. Any guesses? No, it's not that. It's a cotton gin. I mean, with Eli Whitney's invention of the cotton gin, which you've learned in other classes, it stimulated demand for cotton textiles. Now it used to take a very long time to get cotton, but with the gin, the speed that we could produce and clean cotton was much faster. European demand for cotton led to a boom in cotton production and slavery, unfortunately, in the southern United States. New textile machinery led to the factory system. Power-driven machines were able to mass-produce goods very fast and cheap. Factory owners made huge profits by selling mass-produced clothing. And the textile industry and the rise of the factory system led to growth in other industries. Factories needed power and were usually located near rivers. In 1765, James Watt, you might have heard that name before, Watt, it's what a lot of lights use, invented the steam engine. The steam engine produced more power and allowed factories to be built in cities near workers. Factories led to a demand for faster transportation. Roads and canals were built in England. Robert Fulton's steamboat increased the speed of water travel. No longer were they reliant on the currents. They could just power through it now if they had to. The greatest improvement to transportation was the steam-powered railroad. Railroads were fast, increased profits, and stimulated the iron and coal industries. As you can see, I mean, look at just how much tracks were laid down in England over a 30-year period. The Industrial Revolution obviously led to an increase in coal to power the factories. Iron was needed to produce new machines, engines, and railroad tracks. And by 1800, England made more iron than all other nations combined in the world. Now we're going to take a break there, and I'm going to show you a video which I think you guys might find enjoyable. At this point I would show an 18-minute video, but no one has time to sit through a video. Alright, let's have a discussion. Does anybody have any questions? Anybody? No one? Alright, let's go back to the well, I have something. Why do you think that clothing and textiles was the first to industrialize? Why do you think it was something so basic as clothing and not a commodity, something that people would actually want?
Maybe for greed.
That's fair. I could see that. They need clothing more than they need their things that they like to do for fun. I mean, plus there also might not have been the proper technology. That's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Alright, let's go back to the PowerPoint. The textile industry and the rise of the factory system led to the growth of other industries. Henry Bessemer invented a cheap process for making steel which is stronger than iron. I mean, most of these buildings that we see still use steel today because they work. It's a great building block. Steel allowed engineers to design more powerful machines, taller buildings, and longer bridges. That's why a lot of our tallest buildings that we see have been built in the last 150 years. I mean, you don't really see a lot of 1,000-year-old buildings that are more than 2 to 3 stories for that very, very important reason. Other inventions of the Industrial Revolution included electricity, new forms of communication such as the telegraph and telephone, business machines like typewriters and cash registers, and medical improvements like vaccines. I mean, soon it spread throughout Europe and Africa. I mean, Germany started to embrace the new technologies. They had a large supply of coal and iron. They built a large network of railroads, iron textiles, and factories. And by the mid-1800s, Germany itself was also one of the world's industrial leaders and built a powerful modern military. And here's the spread of the Industrial Revolution in the Americas. Southern cotton led to textile mills in the north. after the American Civil War, the industry boomed even faster with all the as the U.S. soon became the world leader in railroads, oil, steel, and electricity. I mean, look. I mean, this is what it was. This is what it was. This is just what it was in the 1880s. I mean, look how small. The millions of tons. And this is what it is 34 years later. I mean, it goes from, what, 1.1 to 15. It's just a massive change. Many U.S. companies merged to form large corporations and monopolies. In conclusion, from the 1700s to the 1900s, revolutions in agriculture, industry, transportation, and communication changed Western Europe and the United States. Industrialization gave Europe tremendous economic and military power. Industry also had numerous negative effects on working conditions and the standard of living for urban workers. Alright, now that we've got the PowerPoint presentation, I want you guys to get in small groups and go over the presentations. At this point, the students would get into small groups, and I would have them go over their guided notes to make sure they all had the right answers. Alright, now that we've got that taken care of, I'm going to lead us in a discussion. Does anybody have any questions, comments, things they want to bring up? Alright, well, thank you very much. I'm going to give you guys have about, what time is it? Oh, you guys have about 3 minutes to finish your homework assignments. I passed back your assignments during the video. You guys have been a great class. You have a couple minutes to do your homework for to do tomorrow. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.